was no discernment happening. No discernment happening because there was very little thinking happening. There was a lot of feelings happening. A lot of stuff was happening. You were going through a lot of stuff. But it's really hard when you're overwhelmed to actually have a clear goal, know yourself, not hate yourself, and pursue the good. It's really tough. So discernment is something that you are able to do once you get to a certain degree of maturity. And you find, as my ministry, I find that when there's something in our hearts that we've not talked about, that we've really been struggling with, or that someone's been through a trauma or something along those lines, before you even worry about discernment, before you can even feel like your life is taking steps forward, you got to go there. And this is what your parents are for. And I know I have a lot of kids in my youth group that don't necessarily have that support. And so counselors, mentor, friends, someone with whom you can verbalize your feelings so that you can begin to make sense of them. So what do I do? All right, say I'm aware of where I'm at, I'm aware of what I'm feeling, and I realize that someone just punched me in the face and I'm really mad. It's a feeling. It happened to me, right? That happened. That's a story for another time. But what I'm feeling because of that circumstance is not necessarily in my control, but I am in control with what I do with it. And that's where discernment comes in. So this is just basic discernment, right? Step one. Step two, we're not even talking about vocation yet, y'all. Just chill. Number two, once I'm aware, then I say, what is God's will for me in this moment? God's will for you, anyone who's taken my class, St. John Bosco, knows that you have 3 points of reference for knowing what God's will is. Reason, the nobility of your heart, and the gospel. You have to actually think it through. You have to ask yourself, is this thing that I'm feeling rooted in my true identity? Is it a true desire that's going to lead me to freedom? Or is it a lie? And what does the gospel have to say about this? You will find that when you're struggling to discern something, when you're struggling to bring your feelings to a decision, be that in a relationship or be that with, I don't know, just whatever you're going through at any given time during the day. You know, wake up on the wrong side of the bed and I just feel like trash. You know, whenever I'm trying to discern a feeling and get to a point where I am making decisions, I need these 3 points of reference. For me to get to these 3 points of reference, as I said at the beginning, I have to be able to be aware of what I'm feeling and think. Number two, and this is the hard part I think for most of us, I have to think that I'm worth something. You have to think that you're good. You have to be able to see your own dignity and worth. Because you have to be able to fight for yourself. You got to be able to look in the mirror and not see a failure, not see trash, not just see your internal struggles. Because if you're able to see the goodness, who you are, what does that goodness flourishing look like? And that's the nobility of your heart. To be that gift of love and beauty that makes the world around you more beautiful. To be that truly noble presence that heals other people. To be the one who protects and provides. You can't do that unless you see goodness in yourself. Thirdly, prayer. Actually have time for prayer. So if I'm thinking about things, and I'm looking deeply into my heart about things, and I'm bringing it to the gospel, then I will begin to see a path forward. And as I see a path forward, I begin to discern God's will. Again, this is not about vocation. This is about any decision that you're making in your life. Going to college, what college to go to, boundaries in a relationship, respect for your parents, priorities in the use of my time, struggling with a particular sin in your life. All of this. Why am I going to Mass? All of these things, it's a matter of discernment. What is true, what is truly rooted in my true identity and flourishing that identity, and the gospel. What does the gospel have to say about this? Sounds like a whole lot of work. I know, that's why you couldn't do it in middle school, but you guys are starting to grow up. And it's through discernment that you stop just being driven by your circumstances and you actually start to experience the value of the gift that you are when it's given. Because the value is there, but you don't necessarily see it or experience it. The third level of discernment, vocational discernment. So I have freedom, I've been trying to figure out my freedom, and I know God has freedom, and He created me for a purpose. How do I figure out what God's will is for me? I'll say the first thing you need is a really deep desire to be happy. A deep, when I say deep, I mean deep desire to be happy. I am not going to settle for anything. For anything. You pray for a desire to be happy? If you don't, you're in trouble. Because people will tell you how to be happy all day long. It comes back a little bit to listening to the noble desires in your heart. It definitely goes to the gospel, and it's certainly reasonable. Deep desire to be happy. And happiness doesn't necessarily come from doing what appears to be the hardest thing. My brother really wanted to be a priest, and he was absolutely miserable. And he said, I found in marriage what I was looking for in the priesthood. And I was like, go figure, I found in the priesthood what I was looking for in marriage. Weird. What were we looking for? Freedom. Happiness, peace, joy. When you're doing God's will in your life, it's not hard. This idea that, oh man, God's like this overbearing, I don't know what, who's just forcing me to do things against my will. I don't know what God y'all worship. I don't know that one. God created me to have life and have it abundantly. Created me to be happy. And as I look at the possibilities in my life, which can be very overwhelming, I get that, but as I look for the overwhelming possibilities in my life, what is my gut? What's that gut instinct? It's my desire for happiness. So when I'm looking at how did Father Paul end up as a priest? Well, I was visiting my brother who was in the seminary, and he said, why don't you become a priest? And I said, well, because I want to get married. He says, well, all normal guys who want to become priests want to get married. That's not an excuse. I was like, well, if that's not my excuse, then I'll just give it a try. And then I gave it a try, and I was surprised by how happy I was. I was also surprised how miserable he was. I could see it immediately. He was struggling with all sorts. He told me later all the things that he was struggling with, and I was like, I know. You could see it. And yet, I felt that I was at home. I felt a deep sense of peace, and I immediately my life became fruitful. I repeat those. Those are the three things when you hit these three, whether it's your married vocation, single vocation, consecrated life, religious life, priesthood, when you find your home, that's what it feels like. You have a deep sense, I'm home. Incredible peace, and my life just begins to flourish. In a way that I just don't expect. Like, it's a surprise. Like, you mean God actually wants me to be happy? And He's going to make it pop? Yeah, actually. God does exist. He's not an idea. He's a being who actually exists. And He loves you. And His reason for creating you was your happiness. He will not call you to a vocation in which you will be unhappy. And if you're seeking a vocation, a particular vocation, and you're miserable, leave it. Please. For the good of the church and of humanity. Right? Does that make sense? So discernment in general, discernment like basic vanilla discernment, and then discernment of your vocation. The first, understand that you're going from your real circumstances to decisions. How do I do that? By looking at what's rational, that moral calculus, thinking things through. You guys are smart, you're intelligent, you're capable of truth. You listen to the nobility of your heart. Is this desire that I have rooted in me? We feel it's a desire. They're not all rooted. Get the ones that aren't rooted out, and live the ones that are lead you to happiness. And third, what does the gospel have to say about this? And if I think that I'm really ready, mature enough to actually discern my vocation, as far like with the big V, then what I'm looking for is happiness. I'm looking for deep sense of being at home. I'm looking for peace that circumstances can't affect. And I'm looking for fruitfulness in my life. Does that make sense? Let's jump to questions. Still thinking about it. Yes.
What if you feel strongly called to two vocations at the same time?
If you feel strongly called to do two vocations at the same time, patience, right? I think that let me put it this way. I was talking to Kevin about this earlier. You need to love every single one of those vocations. I love marriage. I absolutely love it. I encourage people to do it all the time. I think it's the greatest idea ever. Right? If that's what God's called you to. I love the single life. The impact that they have in society is unbelievable. I love the priesthood. Right? And since I see it as something good and something noble, it's something that I can love. What I'm desiring is happiness. And so, when I'm looking at various things that are good and noble and beautiful, and I desire them, maybe I might be a little confused with what exactly God's calling me to. Patient. That's when you just have to give yourself the time and the prayer to actually feel. Because it's not just up here. Remember, discernment is going from feelings to decisions. It's not just something you're going to think through and say, oh, the most generous thing for me to do would be a priest. Therefore, I'm going to be a priest. Please no. It comes from it comes from a felt experience of God's love for me that leads me to profound happiness here. Right? Does that make sense? So you just got to be patient with the experience. It'll become good. So yeah, no. We want to tell me now. Don't look that way. Sorry. Other questions? Got like 8 minutes. Yep.
Since you had a desire originally to get married, what made you change your mind and become a priest?
I never felt like I was changing my mind. Now, when I use this word very carefully. It'd be a whole different talk. What is dating? So I'm not even sure what you guys understand by that word. But when I would intentionally hang out with girls, I have no regrets. Fantastic friends. I never lost a friend over dating, ever. Because we were friends. And I wanted to marry my best friend. And I had a deep, deep desire to do so. And I was on the same page with most of my friends. I was in a private Protestant school. And for some reason, there was a lot of Catholics, and it gelled. We just had a good class. We weren't doing drugs. We weren't the drinking type. That was the classes ahead of us. We want to be a little different. So we decided to rebel by skipping school and stuff, but not by doing that type of thing. And so we had really, really healthy friendships. So with God, I think because of the healthiness of our friendships, I was learning